There's a reason why. It's because when it rains, all the roads get shut down and everyone complains. David Stokes, Executive Director of Great Rivers Habitat Alliance. David, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, McGraw.
We love having you, but unfortunately you're coming on the show more and more frequently when it comes to these problems with the levees.
Well, if your listeners are thinking to themselves, gee, we sure seem to be having, it's odd that we're having 500-year floods in back-to-back years. Maybe our own development choices are causing this. Well, you know what? They'd be right. This is not just, what are the odds that nature did this 2 years in a row? We're doing this to ourselves through our development choices, through over-channeling of the rivers, through too many levees, and through building developments in the floodplain, putting asphalt and concrete where Mother Nature intended for water to go. We're doing these floods to ourselves.
Okay, now hold on a second here. Are you telling me that the rainfall, this rain we've had this time and then December back in 2015, I thought they were anomalies and they just flooded the system that just couldn't handle the normal water?
They are large rainfalls. Nobody's gonna dispute they were very large rainfalls. But guess what? Before we built the floodplain up, there were places for this water to go along the Merrimack and the Missouri and everywhere else, and the Quiver, everywhere else. Mother Nature had a place to put the water, and had since the first settlers came to St. Louis. But they didn't pave over irreplaceable floodplain. They didn't take the rivers, especially the big rivers, and instead of allowing them to expand like a normal flood event, channel them through levees and make the flooding worse and the water go faster and more harmful. We've done, every academic who's studied flooding in this area, from Professor Charles Belt in the 70s to Professor Bob Criss now, comes to the conclusion that these are the phrase is simple. These are man-made floods. We do this to ourselves.
We are seeing places flood that have never flooded before in rains and storms that aren't as bad as past storms.
Precisely. That's why I feel so bad for so many people in Eureka and Pacific and near Valley Park, because before they built this Valley Park levee to protect a small part of Valley Park at the expense of everybody else, before they somehow, and nobody knows how this happened, before they permitted a landfill to go right in the heart of the floodplain of the Merrimack River along near 141, they put a large landfill right there in the floodplain. Somehow this was allowed within the past 10 or to 15 years. Before they did these things, the people in Pacific and Eureka, they didn't see this level of flooding. And there are absolutely people and businesses along the Merrimack now who never saw these level of floods before, because when Mother Nature ran its course,
right,
even with huge rainfalls, it didn't get up that high. Now it does, and that's one of the reasons why, man, there's just so many things we need to change. Right now, it's great to be focused on supporting our emergency responders and helping the people who need help. We've had 3 deaths from flooding in Missouri, and those are 3 tragedies. We've got to fix the emergencies now. But you know what? Next week, when the floods have gone, it's time to get serious about changing the policies that help to create these disasters in the first place.
I want to talk about future in a second, but let's talk about Valley Park, because the mayor has called for an emergency evacuation, a mandatory evacuation, because the levee there, which held in 2015, they're assuming might not hold this time around?
Well, let's all pray that it does. And it's right. They are a mandatory evacuation for the areas protected by the levee.
Right.
So there's some oddness to that.
Which was built higher than it was supposed to be the first time around.
It was built in some places significantly higher. And that's a dispute that we've had with the Corps. But
right,
the Corps, to their credit, is now measuring levees elsewhere up and down the rivers and finding them, as we talked about last week, that they're improperly high consistently wherever we go. And these levees that are improperly high, they make it impossible for other people to plan, because other people think, well, you built the levee to what the Corps told you to, and so that's going to affect, this is the 100-year floodplain, this is the 500-year floodplain. These numbers are meaningless, as Professor Criss at WashU says, because due to our own development patterns and over-levying, we've blown away any concept of a 500-year flood, as evidenced by the fact that we've had them 2 in 16 months along the Merrimack.
Future development, David Stokes, are you telling me that there are people who are still working the levers of local government to build in local floodplains and build more levees?
Absolutely. I mean, out in Maryland Heights, they built their levee. They got that built 20 years ago, and now the plan is to just take all that land, which was supposed to be floodplain, which is floodplain in Mother Nature's view,
Right.
and develop it. Take 1,800 acres for asphalt and concrete. Up in Lincoln County, they've got a plan. The Quiver River is overflowing like crazy right now, and there's a plan in Lincoln County called the Port of Lincoln to take 7,000 acres of farmland and wetlands along the river and turn it into a development distribution center for trucks and trains and barges. And 7,000 acres of asphalt and concrete just north of where the Quiver River is blowing out bridges right now. Where is that water going to go? We continue to do this over and over and over, and then we react like you don't react like it. Thank God, and others. This isn't an accident. We're doing this to ourselves, and it's time to stop.
These rainfalls, are they as bad or worse than 1993? Because it seems like 1993, that flood was the Great Flood, and everything's sort of marked on that 93 flood. And everyone talks about Chesterfield Valley, right? If it's as bad as the rains were in 93, and Chesterfield Valley was filled with water, the water isn't going there anymore. So where are we in comparison to the 93 floods?
I don't know, and because it's my understanding of the 93 floods that it was, well, we got a lot of rain here. I mean, I was in St. Louis the summer of 93. I was home from college and living here. I remember it. But it was also enormous amounts of rain out west. That just along with the snowpack that came down in May, it just rained and rained and rained throughout the whole Missouri River Basin.
Right.
And it rained for weeks on end in some parts of Montana and Idaho and South Dakota and and that rain, along with the snowpack and our own rains here, all just came down the river.
Right.
And that was what's so amazing about 1993. But keep in mind, right now the Merrimack is topping. It's higher now than it was in 1993.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing some of our rivers are topping those records just as they did last year.
Right. So if it rained more, and there was more rain in 93, because in 93 Highway 70 never flooded, right?
70 never flooded. There was, and we blew out levees, but at least along Chesterfield, the water had a place to go. It destroyed the farms in Chesterfield once the levee blew. Can you imagine what will happen if that levee blows in Chesterfield now, and the destruction and potential death?
Right.
I mean, it would be just devastating. The saying goes, there's two types of levees. Levees that fail now and levees that fail in the future.
Right.
Now, that's not meant to just scare the hell out of everybody here.
Right.
But we want everybody to be safe, but we need to we didn't learn the lesson in 1993. All right, all the serious floods that we've had over the past 20 years, we haven't learned any lessons. We took Chesterfield Valley and we turned it into the world's biggest outdoor shopping center.
Right.
That's where water is supposed to go. We should be building higher. We should be building smarter. We should be building safer. And it's time for significant policy changes in this state.
The rain we've had the last couple of days, it was a lot of rain, but I mean, it wasn't like some biblical proportion of rain. It rained for a couple of days. It wasn't, it was fine, but yet it's basically gridlocked us over the last couple of days because of a couple inches of rain. A
few decades ago, before all this floodplain development up and down these rivers, this area would have handled this flood much, much better than we are now, because we're doing this to ourselves, and we have to stop. And please check out our Facebook page, Great Rivers Habitat Alliance, our website, grha.org, and follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes. This is something that our organization has been working on for years, and we're going to keep working on it. We're going to keep working on it till we get it right in this area. I don't care if it takes one more year or 20.
Right.
This is what we're about at Great Rivers Habitat Alliance.
Yeah, they're still wanting to build in floodplains. It's one of the weirdest things in the world. Executive Director, Great Rivers Habitat Alliance, also a friend of the show, David Stokes. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, McGraw.
7:28 here.